The Kryllian Empire had perfected the art of galactic conquest down to a science, complete with flowcharts, bureaucratic forms in triplicate, and a surprisingly comprehensive employee benefits package. For 3,000 standard years, their military machine had rolled across star systems like a well-oiled bulldozer through a garden party, leaving behind neatly organized colonies and very polite thank you notes from grateful new subjects who definitely weren't writing under duress. Their latest target was a backwater planet called New Brisbane, inhabited by a species that had somehow managed to crawl out of their home system despite possessing all the military sophistication of a particularly aggressive house plant. The humans, as intelligence reports indicated, had technology roughly equivalent to what the Kryllians had been using as children's toys approximately 2 millennia ago. The conquest was expected to take 3 standard hours, including a lunch break and time for the mandatory post-invasion paperwork. General Vextar Kryllian stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable bureaucracy, reviewing holographic displays with the same enthusiasm most beings reserved for watching paint dry in slow motion. His scaled hide gleamed under the harsh bridge lighting, and his 4 yellow eyes tracked the incoming data with mechanical precision. Vextar had overseen 47 successful planetary acquisitions, each one more tediously routine than the last. He'd actually started bringing crossword puzzles to invasions. "Sir," announced Commander Tiss, her voice carrying the particular brand of boredom that came from explaining obvious things to superior officers. The human settlement shows standard defensive patterns, primitive energy shields, basic projectile weapons, and what appears to be a strongly worded letter of protest transmitted on all frequencies. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. How charmingly optimistic. Deploy the standard pacification protocol. I want this finished before dinner. Down on New Brisbane, Marcus Chen was having what he'd later describe as the worst Tuesday of his life, though admittedly, his previous worst Tuesday had involved accidentally volunteering for a charity fun run, so the bar was admittedly low. He knelt beside a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, his toolkit spread around him like the components of a very boring puzzle, while sweat dripped steadily onto the maintenance manual he was pretending to understand. The 32-year-old had the unremarkable appearance of someone who deliberately cultivated unremarkability as both an art form and a survival strategy. Medium height, medium build, medium brown hair that looked like it had been cut by someone with a medium understanding of how scissors worked. His hands, however, told a different story to anyone observant enough to look. They moved with the precise efficiency of someone who'd spent years learning to disassemble things far more complex than atmospheric processors, and considerably more dangerous. Marcus. The voice of his sister Zoe drifted across the maintenance yard, carrying the particular mix of affection and exasperation that siblings perfected over decades of practice. The news feeds are going crazy. There are ships in the outer system. Zoe Chen bounded toward him with the energy of someone who hadn't yet learned that the universe was generally disappointing. At 26, she possessed the kind of optimistic enthusiasm that made hardened cynics either want to protect her or check her for signs of head injury. Her artist's studio occupied the converted warehouse next to Marcus's workshop, and the scent of polymer clay and paint solvents had become as familiar as family to him. "Probably just another trading convoy," Marcus replied, though something cold and familiar was already settling in his stomach. "Remember last month, when everyone panicked over that Centaurian freight hauler?" Zoe's laugh was bright as solar flares. "This is different, Marcus. The orbital defense platforms are actually doing something other than collecting space dust, and Mrs. Patterson down the street is convinced it's an invasion fleet." Marcus had learned long ago that Mrs. Patterson's paranoid delusions had an uncomfortable tendency toward accuracy, like a broken chronometer that happened to be right twice a day. He stood slowly, joints protesting in ways that reminded him he wasn't 22 anymore, and squinted at the sky where distant specks of light moved with decidedly non-random patterns. "Zoe," he said quietly, "I need you to go pack a bag. Emergency protocols." She opened her mouth to argue, then caught something in his expression that made her pause. Marcus had exactly 3 expressions. mildly confused maintenance worker, slightly annoyed maintenance worker, and something else that appeared so rarely she'd almost forgotten it existed. This was the something else. How bad? She asked. Pack light and pack fast. The Kryllian advance scouts reported back with the kind of news that made military planners reach for stronger stimulants. The humans weren't surrendering. They weren't even negotiating. They were, in fact, shooting at things. Clarify that report, Captain Zorn, Vextar commanded, his 4 eyes narrowing to slits of irritation. Sir, the human settlements have activated their defense grids and are broadcasting what our linguists believe to be highly creative insults involving our ancestry and questionable suggestions about our reproductive habits. Vextar felt the first stirrings of something resembling actual interest. Curious. Begin standard pacification bombardment. Target military installations only. We want the infrastructure intact for processing. Sir, intelligence indicates the humans have integrated their military and civilian facilities in a most inefficient manner. Precise targeting may be challenging. Then, challenge yourself, Captain. I didn't rise to general rank by accepting excuses. The bombardment began with surgical precision and all the restraint of beings who considered the complete annihilation of entire worlds to be poor resource management. Energy beams lanced down from the Kryllian fleet, targeting defensive emplacements, communications arrays, and anything that looked vaguely military through the lens of alien sensors that occasionally mistook art installations for weapons platforms. Zoe's studio evaporated in a wash of superheated plasma. She'd been running toward it, trying to save the sculpture she'd been working on for months, when the beam struck. The shockwave threw her across the street like a discarded toy, and she landed hard against a concrete barrier, consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Marcus saw it happen from 3 blocks away. Time slowed to the consistency of cold honey as he watched his sister's studio become a crater of molten polymer and twisted metal. He saw her thrown form, saw the blood, saw the way she didn't get up. Something inside Marcus Chen's chest cracked open like an egg, and what crawled out had been sleeping for 7 years. The man who'd spent the last decade maintaining atmospheric processors had once been Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Defense Force, 15th Special Operations Battalion. He'd operated behind enemy lines during the Martian Independence War, the Titan mining conflicts, and 3 different classified actions that officially never happened and unofficially kept several therapists in business. He'd retired because he'd grown tired of killing, tired of being good at it, tired of the way violence came to him as naturally as breathing. But that man had never had a sister. The transformation was subtle and terrifying. Marcus's posture shifted, his movements became fluid and purposeful, and his eyes developed the 1,000-yard stare of someone calculating angles, cover points, and the most efficient methods of introducing sharp objects to soft tissues. He moved through his workshop with mechanical precision, retrieving items that had been stored in sealed containers and labeled as emergency supplies, but served purposes far more specific than food and medical equipment. The combat armor was military grade, painted to look like a maintenance exoskeleton. The weapons were civilian models that had been extensively and illegally modified. The man putting them on was a civilian who had never really stopped being a soldier. Commander Tiss was experiencing the unique frustration of a military professional, watching a simple operation become complicated for reasons that made no logical sense. Her tactical displays showed their forces advancing steadily through the human settlements, meeting resistance that was both fierce and utterly futile. The humans were using projectile weapons that bounced harmlessly off Kryllian armor, fighting with technology that was outdated when her grandmother was hatched. And yet they kept fighting. Commander, reported a field officer, Platoon 7 has gone silent. Equipment malfunction. Unknown. Last transmission indicated they were pursuing fleeing civilians through the industrial district. This felt her stomach clench in what civilians might call worry, but military officers preferred to term tactical concern. Dispatch a recovery team. The recovery team found Platoon 7 scattered across 6 city blocks in pieces that required considerable effort to identify as having once been Kryllian soldiers. The manner of their deaths suggested someone with extensive knowledge of Kryllian anatomy and a deeply personal investment in demonstrating that knowledge as violently as possible. "Sir," the recovery team leader's voice crackled over the comm with the particular strain of someone trying very hard not to sound terrified. Whatever did this knew exactly where to cut. Marcus moved through the city like death wearing work clothes. The Kryllian soldiers were well-trained, well-equipped, and utterly unprepared for an enemy who understood their technology better than they did and possessed a level of focused rage that bordered on the supernatural. He'd studied their species during his military years, learned their weaknesses, memorized their equipment specifications. He'd never expected to use that knowledge to paint the streets with alien blood, but life was full of surprises. The first patrol he encountered was investigating a civilian shelter. They'd been in the process of sorting through the terrified inhabitants when Marcus arrived, and their commander was examining a young girl who couldn't have been more than 10. The expression on his scaled face suggested he was considering whether she might make a suitable processing sample. Marcus killed him first, because leadership should be rewarded with priority treatment. The blade entered between the base of his skull and his first vertebra, severing the neural connections that controlled voluntary movement. The commander had approximately 3 seconds to contemplate his life choices before his body stopped cooperating with his intentions. The remaining soldiers reacted with professional speed and complete uselessness. Their energy weapons were designed to penetrate human body armor and barriers, not to track targets that moved like smoke and struck like lightning. Marcus flowed between their shots, inside their defenses, too close for their long-range weapons, and too fast for their close combat training. When the shooting stopped, 7 Kryllian soldiers lay dead, and 32 humans stared at the man in maintenance coveralls who just demonstrated that their definition of primitive might need some adjustment. "Stay here," Marcus told them quietly. "Keep quiet, someone will come for you." He was gone before they could ask who. General Vextar was beginning to understand that his evening meal would be delayed. The reports, filtering back from the surface, painted an increasingly concerning picture of what should have been a routine pacification operation. His forces were encountering unexpected casualties, entire patrols were going silent, and the human resistance seemed to be growing more organized rather than collapsing under superior firepower. "Commander Tiss, explain to me how a primitive species with projectile weapons is causing my forces to request reinforcements." Tiss consulted her tactical displays with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle using pieces from several different boxes. "Sir, intelligence may have underestimated human military capabilities. They appear to have hidden defensive positions and possibly off-world military support. Then find their command structure and eliminate it. I want this planet processed before the colonial administration starts filing complaint reports. Sir, we've identified what appears to be a command center in the industrial district. Unusual energy signatures suggest advanced communications equipment. Deploy a full assault team. Crush whatever passes for their military leadership." The industrial district command center was actually Zoe's art studio, or what remained of it after the bombardment. Marcus knelt beside his sister in the rubble, holding her unconscious form while medics worked with equipment they'd scavenged from the emergency supplies. She was alive, breathing, but hurt in ways that made something primal and violent growl in the depths of his chest. "Sir," one of the medics looked up with the exhausted relief of someone delivering good news against all odds. "She's stable. Concussion, some internal bruising, but nothing permanent. She'll need proper medical facilities, but she's going to be fine." Marcus nodded once, carefully arranging her sleeping form on the makeshift stretcher. "Get her to the underground shelters. Stay with the civilians." "What about you, sir?" Marcus was strapping on the last of limes, his equipment, checking weapons that hummed with barely contained lethality. "I'm going to have a conversation with their commanding officer." The assault team that arrived to investigate the command center found themselves walking into what historians would later describe as a master class in the practical applications of applied physics to biological systems. Marcus had spent the previous 3 hours turning the industrial district into a maze of death, using his knowledge of Kryllian tactics and psychology to create a killing ground that would have impressed his old instructors. He picked them off one by one, using their own aggressive advancement against them, turning their superior firepower into a liability in the confined spaces between buildings. Each kill was precise, surgical, and intensely personal. These weren't soldiers defending their world. This was a brother protecting his sister, and the difference was measurable in the enthusiasm with which he applied sharp implements to soft tissue. General Vextar was pacing the bridge of his flagship when the reports stopped coming entirely. His assault team had vanished into the industrial district as completely as if the planet had simply swallowed them, leaving behind only silence and an increasing sense of unease that was beginning to affect crew morale. "Sir," Commander Thiss announced with the tone of someone delivering news that no one wanted to hear, "we've lost contact with all ground teams in the industrial sector. Orbital surveillance shows extensive casualties." "How extensive?" "Sir, I believe we may need to reconsider our threat assessment of this species." Vextar's mandibles clicked with irritation. "Clarify that statement, Commander." "Sir, our ground forces have suffered 93% casualties. The humans appear to possess military capabilities significantly beyond our intelligence estimates. Then we'll demonstrate the consequences of defying Kryllian authority. Prepare for orbital bombardment. Full sterilization protocols." "Sir, that will destroy the planet's infrastructure value. The Colonial Administration will. The Colonial Administration can file complaints with the corpses. I want this system pacified, Commander, not negotiated with." Marcus stood in the ruins of his sister's studio, surrounded by the artistic dreams that had been reduced to melted polymer and twisted metal, and felt something settle into perfect crystalline clarity. The Kryllian fleet hung above the planet like a sword, preparing to drop death from orbit because they'd learned that ground forces were insufficient for the task. They'd hurt his sister. They'd destroyed her art. They'd threatened his world. It was time to return the favor. The maintenance exoskeleton Marcus wore was more than it appeared, designed by engineers who understood that sometimes the best military equipment looked like civilian gear. Hidden within its bulky frame were systems that would have made Terran Defense Force quartermasters weep with envy. Personal shielding, enhanced strength amplification, and most importantly, a jump pack capable of atmospheric to orbital insertion. Marcus had joined the TDF because he believed in protecting people. He'd left because he'd grown tired of being a weapon, but some situations called for weapons, and some weapons came with a conscience attached. The jump from New Brisbane's surface to the Kryllian flagship would have been impossible for most humans, inadvisable for anyone sane, and completely suicidal for someone without intimate knowledge of Kryllian ship design and the security protocols they'd been using for the last 1,000 years without significant updates. Marcus wasn't most humans. The inevitable bureaucracy was a masterpiece of military engineering, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize continents and equipped with defensive systems that could repel entire fleets. Its designers had considered every possible threat: enemy, warships, boarding parties, sabotage, and hostile alien environments. They hadn't considered a single extremely motivated human with extensive special operations training and access to equipment that technically didn't exist. Marcus hit the hull with the subtle grace of a meteor, his exoskeleton's impact dampeners working overtime to prevent him from becoming a small crater in the armor plating. The cutting torch made short work of the outer hull, while his suit systems interfaced with Kryllian security protocols in ways that would have impressed their programmers if they'd lived long enough to appreciate the craftsmanship. General Vextar was reviewing bombardment coordinates when the bridge lights flickered and went out. "Commander, report," he demanded, though something cold was already settling in his stomach. "Sir, we're experiencing cascading system failures throughout the ship. Engineering reports." "Sir, engineering isn't responding." The bridge's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and in that crimson glow, Vextar saw his crew turning to look at him with expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The soft sound of the bridge doors cycling open seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Marcus Chen stepped onto the bridge, wearing a maintenance exoskeleton, painted with the blood of Kryllian soldiers, carrying weapons that hummed with barely restrained violence, and radiating the kind of calm, focused intent that made veteran warriors consider early retirement. Behind him, the corridor flickered with emergency lighting and the unmistakable evidence that his journey to the bridge had been anything but unopposed. "General Vextar Kryllian," Marcus said conversationally, his voice carrying clearly through the bridge's comm systems. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Vextar's 4 eyes fixed on this impossible human, this primitive creature that had somehow fought through his ship's defenses like they were constructed of paper and wishful thinking. "You are one being, a single primitive warrior against the might of the Kryllian Empire." Marcus smiled, and it was the kind of expression that made small children hide behind their parents and seasoned soldiers check their weapons. "You hurt my sister. Your sister is irrelevant. This world will be processed according to standard protocols. You cannot." The general's speech ended abruptly when Marcus moved, covering the distance between them with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years learning exactly how fast he could kill things. The combat knife that appeared in his hand wasn't regulation issue for any military organization that officially existed, and it slid between Vextar's ribs with the ease of a key turning in a well-oiled lock. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said quietly, his face inches from the general's. "I can't save my world. I can't stop your empire. I can't even guarantee my sister will be safe tomorrow." He twisted the blade, and Vextar made a sound that didn't translate well across species barriers, but conveyed suffering quite effectively. "But you know what I can do, General," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the conversational tone of someone discussing the weather. "I can make sure you never hurt anyone's sister again." The spine snapped with a sound like a tree branch breaking in a storm. Commander Tiss watched her commanding officer crumple to the deck, his nervous system no longer on speaking terms with the rest of his anatomy, and made the kind of rapid tactical decision that separated survivors from casualties in military operations. She looked at the human standing over Vextar's body, considered the evidence of what he'd done to reach this point, and weighed her options with the cold calculation of someone who'd risen through the ranks by being practical rather than heroic. "The fleet withdraws," she announced to the bridge crew, who seemed remarkably supportive of this decision. "All ships, immediate tactical retreat. Report system as unsuitable for colonial development." Marcus nodded once, stepping away from the general's corpse. "Appreciated, Commander. I'll be leaving now." "Sir?" Thiss called after him as he walked toward the ruined bridge doors. "May I ask, what are you?" Marcus paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm a maintenance worker, Commander. I fix things that are broken." He looked back at Vextar's body, then at the Kryllian bridge crew who were very carefully not making eye contact. "Sometimes," he added, "I fix them permanently." The Kryllian fleet departed New Brisbane's system with remarkable speed for ships of their size, leaving behind only some extremely creative incident reports that described the planet as experiencing technical difficulties and recommended for future administrative review pending resolution of atmospheric anomalies. The paperwork was filed in triplicate, as regulation demanded, though the regulations hadn't anticipated a filing category for primitive species demonstrated uncomfortable proficiency in applied violence. Marcus found Zoe in the underground shelters, awake and arguing with a medic about discharge procedures, with the kind of stubborn determination that ran in their family like a genetic condition. When she saw him, still wearing the maintenance exoskeleton that was now considerably more blood-stained than when he'd started the evening, her expression shifted through surprise, concern, and finally settling on the exasperated affection of someone who'd grown up with a brother who occasionally disappeared for months at a time and returned with new scars and a reluctance to discuss his vacation. "Marcus," she said, "you look like you've had a very long day." "You could say that." He settled beside her on the makeshift medical cot, suddenly feeling every one of his 32 years plus interest. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got thrown across a street by an alien energy weapon, but the doctor says I'll live." She studied his face, reading the exhaustion and something else that she'd learned not to ask about directly. "Everything okay up there?" Marcus looked up at the shelter's ceiling, thinking about Kryllian warships retreating toward the edge of the system at speeds that suggested they'd remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Yeah, everything's fine. The situation resolved itself. Resolved itself. Sometimes problems fix themselves if you apply the right kind of pressure to the right place. Zoe Chen was many things: an artist, a dreamer, someone who saw beauty in the world that others missed. But she was also Marcus Chen's sister, which meant she'd inherited the same stubborn practicality that kept him alive through situations that should have been fatal. She looked at her brother, covered in substances that probably weren't paint, wearing equipment that didn't look nearly as civilian as it had that morning, and made a decision to ask different questions. Are they coming back? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Commander Tiss and the expression on her face when she'd ordered the retreat. He thought about the reports that would be filed, the warnings that would be passed along through Kryllian command channels, and the way his name would probably appear on lists that would make future invasion fleets very carefully consider whether New Brisbane was worth the administrative headaches. No, he said finally. I don't think they are. Good, Zoe said simply, and leaned against his shoulder in the way she'd done since childhood when the world felt too big and uncertain. I was working on a really nice sculpture. I'd hate to have to start over again. Marcus laughed, and for the first time in hours, it sounded genuine. Yeah, I know how you feel about starting over. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unmarked by the brief violence that had flickered across the surface of one small world. The Kryllian Empire would continue its expansion, conquering species that couldn't defend themselves and processing worlds that lacked the tactical inconvenience of protective older brothers. Their bureaucracy would file the appropriate paperwork, update their threat assessments, and continue the business of galactic conquest with the methodical efficiency that had served them for millennia. But they would remember New Brisbane, and they would remember the lesson written in General Vextar's broken spine, that some things in the universe were more dangerous than superior technology, advanced tactics, or overwhelming firepower. Some things were worth protecting, and the beings doing the protecting didn't always follow the rules of civilized warfare. Sometimes, they wrote their own rules, and the penalty for breaking them was significantly more permanent than a strongly worded diplomatic protest. The Kryllian Empire was very good at conquest, but they were practical beings at heart. They understood cost-benefit analysis, acceptable losses, and the important difference between victory and profitability. What they were still learning to understand was the simple truth that Marcus Chen had demonstrated with such devastating effectiveness, that touching someone's sister was the kind of mistake you only made once, because the universe rarely provided opportunities to make it twice. The galaxy was vast, full of species to conquer and worlds to process. There was no need to waste resources on planets where the local maintenance workers had such inconvenient hobbies.